Is Mission Control Houston at NASA's Johnson Space Center, and we are coming to you live in the International Space Station's Flight Control Room as we begin our coverage for the undocking operations of SpaceX's 31st commercial resupply mission for NASA to the International Space Station. In just a few minutes, the SpaceX Dragon cargo spacecraft is set to leave the space station after completing the first part of his mission. That undocking is scheduled at approximately 10:05 a.m. Central, 11:05 a.m. Eastern. The main objective of the spacecraft was to deliver cargo to the people living and working aboard the International Space Station. The NASA Flight Control team here in Mission Control Houston and the SpaceX teams in Hawthorne, California, entered into integrated operations a short time ago. They also pulled go for the undock command.
Undock time is 1600, so you will need to stand down from ARED from 1600.
With its mission nearly complete, the Dragon spacecraft is ready to return to Earth to make another delivery by returning some scientific experiments and hardware to the researchers on the ground. We are talking about a cargo spacecraft today, so there are no people on board the Dragon spacecraft that's getting ready to depart the space station. You're getting live views on your screen now of Mission Control Houston, but let's go back to some earlier events. Let's take it back to its launch day. The cargo mission that we're talking about today is SpaceX's 31st commercial resupply mission for NASA to the International Space Station. The SpaceX Dragon cargo spacecraft launched atop a Falcon 9 rocket from Launch Complex 39A at NASA's Kennedy Space Center in Florida on Monday, November 4th at 8:29 p.m. Central, 9:29 p.m. Eastern. This is SpaceX's 31st commercial resupply mission for NASA to the International Space Station. And at about 11 minutes after launch, the Dragon itself separated from the second or upper stage of the Falcon 9 rocket into its preliminary orbit. Following an almost 11.5-hour transit, the cargo spacecraft arrived at the forward port of the station's Harmony module on Tuesday, November 5th, and docked to the space station at 8:55 a.m. Central. SpaceX's Dragon spacecraft delivered around 3 tons of new science investigations, food, supplies, and equipment to the international crew. To give a little sampling of what was on board, the spacecraft carried hardware, including a potable water dispenser, filter, an emergency portable breathing apparatus, and other items. We're also in the middle of the holiday season, so some of the food that arrived to the station on November 5th included a holiday package which had some lobster, crab, and quail, as well as a cheese kit. And of course, there was plenty of science experiments that the Dragon spacecraft delivered to the station. Dragon, as we mentioned, is bringing back some hardware and science experiments from the space station. Of course, the major objective of activities aboard the International Space Station. Following the launch of the 31st commercial resupply mission on Dragon from the station last month, there are several science experiments and technology demonstrations on their way back. When Dragon splashes down off the coast of Florida, it allows for quick transportation of the experiments to NASA's Space Systems Processing Facility at the Kennedy Space Center in Florida. This allows researchers to collect data with minimal sample exposure to Earth's gravity. We are about 2.5 minutes away from the first maneuver in the operations, which is the undock command. Once the undock command takes place, that is where we will go through the various hooks that will retract and the umbilicals that will open, and we will get through our undocking portion of coverage today. So we are standing by for that. So we are just about a minute out from the SpaceX Dragon cargo spacecraft, which is getting set to leave the International Space Station after completing the first part of its mission. That undocking is scheduled at approximately 10:05 a.m. Central this morning. If you're just joining us, you are looking at live views of SpaceX Mission Control in Hawthorne, California. And I am sitting here in Mission Control Houston at NASA's Johnson Space Center in the International Space Station's Flight Control Room as we continue our coverage for the undocking operations of SpaceX's 31st commercial resupply mission for NASA to the International Space Station. The NASA Flight Control team here in Mission Control Houston and the SpaceX team in Hawthorne, California that you see on your screen this morning entered into integrated operations a short time ago and also pulled go for that undock command. And we are coming up shortly on that undock command with less than 10 seconds remaining. And we just got confirmation that that undock sequence has begun. All right, so here in Mission Control Houston, Flight Director Garrett Hain consulted with their team about today's undocking procedures and said that they are right on track for the undock command, which just took place at 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern. This undock command will result in a physical separation on the official undocking time, which is scheduled for approximately 10:05 a.m. Central, 11:05 a.m. Eastern, which is in just under 5 minutes from now. SpaceX will send the command to undock, and then the umbilicals will retract, and 2 sets of latches will open. There are a total of 12 sets of latches in 2 groups of 6. We'll get confirmation of that milestone from our Visiting Vehicle Officer, or VVO. The Dragon spacecraft is ready to return to Earth by making another delivery. It's returning some science experiments and hardware back to researchers on the ground. We are talking about a cargo spacecraft today, so there are no people on board the Dragon spacecraft that's getting ready to depart the space station. This spacecraft is also known as a cargo vehicle, as I mentioned, and it paid a visit to the station and is now leaving, hence the name Visiting Vehicle Officer. The VVO is one of the positions here in Mission Control that is monitoring today's undocking. Aboard the space station, NASA astronaut Nick Hague will also monitor the departure of the Dragon spacecraft from the International Space Station and act as an additional person in the loop from the space station's cupola. The cupola is a room aboard the space station that has plenty of windows and a workstation with data screens.
Station Houston on space to ground 2. First set of hooks open. Dragon is committed to undock.
Perfect. You heard that right there. The first set of hooks are open. That means that Dragon is ready to undock. There's no going back from here. So let's go back to talking a little bit about the cupola where NASA astronaut Nick Hague will monitor the departure of the SpaceX Dragon spacecraft. So as I mentioned, the cupola is a room aboard the space station that has plenty of windows and a workstation with data screens. There is a good view of the Dragon spacecraft, and NASA astronaut Nick Hague is acting as a second set of eyes for mission control today. This is especially helpful when the space station is in an orbital nighttime during an undocking. If we cannot get the best views of the spacecraft here in mission control, NASA astronaut Nick Hague aboard station will have a much better vantage point, and if needed, will be able to visually confirm that the spacecraft has separated from the International Space Station. After physical separation, NASA astronaut Nick Hague will also monitor to make sure that the Dragon is behaving as it should while it's still near the space station. He also serves as a contingency in the unlikely event in a loss of control of cargo Dragon.
Station Houston on space to ground 2 for Dragon.
Perfect. We have just confirmed that the second set of hooks are open, so now all 12 hooks have opened, and the first burn is underway for undock burn 1. Undock burn 1 is a short undock burn, which lasts about a second and a half.
All the partners and all the investigators who brought us amazing science and a lot of good treats. So thank you very much, and Godspeed to Jack Toland and the team from SpaceX to bring your science home. Good luck, honey.
At Houston Mission Control, particularly from our daily summary, with these Dragon undocks, you can't help but wondering whether it is to be or not to be. That is the question. And today it was to be.
And you just heard good words from the commander aboard space station right now, NASA astronaut Sunny Williams, as well as NASA astronaut Don Pettit, who wished the departing vehicle goodbye as science returns back to Earth. We have received confirmation of for the umbilical retract, the two sets of hooks that have opened, 2 sets of 6 hooks, a total of 12 hooks have opened. The first undock burn, which is a short burn lasting a minute and a half, or a minute, 1.5 seconds, that gets us slowly away from the space station, and then a second undock burn that took place, undock burn 2, which lasted about 5 seconds to continue to separate the Dragon spacecraft from the International Space Station. So Dragon used it's a combination of its 12 Draco engines around the base of the spacecraft and broke up any stiction between the Dragon cargo vehicle and the docking port. These 2 burns.
With you, Don, on 2.
These 2 burns will help the spacecraft slowly start backing away from the International Space Station.
A couple of cameras set up in node 2, one with an over-the-shoulder view and one with a view zoomed in to the AGA display. And the vent holes are unobstructed, and the inlet on the back is unobstructed.
Once again, the SpaceX's 31st commercial resupply mission to the International Space Station undocked this morning at 10:05 a.m. Central, 11:05 a.m. Eastern, as the space station was flying 260 statute miles above the Pacific Ocean.
Don, the view looks great.
The Dragon spacecraft.
I just want to make sure I understand the mode. I haven't turned anything on yet. I'm going to turn the palm on and let it get warm. I'm going to have the CSA-CP carbon dioxide on, and then when I get all of those guys running, then I will power on the AGA, and I've got some of the NH3 towelettes ready to go.
Copy all. That is the plan. You've got a good understanding, Don, and we will just take serial numbers per your procedure when you're ready.
Okay, AGA serial number 1010, and the palm is serial number 1002. And the CSA CO2 is serial number 1022.
Copy all. Thanks, Don.
And I'm starting up the CO2 monitor and the palm.
Copy. We're following.
And you are looking at views live from the Dragon spacecraft of the International Space Station. The full space station is coming into your view as we speak, and the space station is traveling at about 17,500 miles an hour. And as I mentioned, the undock took place this morning at 10:05 a.m. Central, 11:05 a.m. Eastern. And we are just a few seconds away from the next burn. And we received confirmation of a great depart burn 1 as Dragon continues to back away from the space station. This departure burn lasted about 22 seconds.
I'm getting a low battery alarm on, or a low battery light on the palm. I'm going to go put in some new batteries.
Copy all, Don. Additionally, for Dragon, departure burn 1 is complete.
Perfect. And you heard that here from our flight director. The first the burn is complete. It went really well. As I mentioned, we received confirmation of separation of the cargo Dragon carrying science and hardware home at 10:05 a.m. Central, 11:05 a.m. Eastern, as the International Space Station and Dragon were flying approximately 260 statute miles over the Pacific. The team will continue to monitor the departure of Dragon as it exits the approach ellipsoid. So we have two physical boundaries around the space station. You can't see them since nothing is physically there to mark them, but it's like a property line of your house. The first is called the keep out sphere, and then farther out we have the approach ellipsoid, or the neighborhood of the space station. Here's a good visual representation here on your screen. These are the safety boundaries used in the unlikely event that something goes wrong with the Dragon spacecraft after it undocked.
Station Houston, on 2 for Dragon. Dragon has exited the keep out sphere.
And we just heard that call out. Dragon has exited the keep out sphere. Good news as we continue to monitor the undocking of SpaceX's 31st commercial resupply mission to the International Space Station. You're looking at live views of Cargo Dragon from the International Space Station on its screen as it continues, or begins rather, its departure to splash down off the coast of Florida. So you can see there some of the burns coming through of the Dragon cargo spacecraft, but let's continue to talk a little bit about the safety zones around the space station that require a set of go and no-go poles with different control teams. The first zone I mentioned is called the keep out sphere. It's a zone that consists of an imaginary sphere around the space station with a radius of about 200 meters. The second zone is called the approach ellipsoid. It's an imaginary shape measuring 4 kilometers by 2 kilometers by 2 kilometers, essentially a large 3-dimensional oval. Like I shared earlier, it's another chance to confirm all of the guidance, navigation, and control systems are working correctly on Dragon before it moves away from the space station. And if you are just joining us right now, this is Mission Control Houston here at NASA's Johnson Space Center as we are coming to you live in the International Space Station's flight control room here. We're continuing our coverage for the undocking operations of SpaceX's 31st commercial resupply mission to the International Space Station. You are looking at live views of the Dragon spacecraft from the International Space Station as it continues to depart the various boundaries that surround the space station. Once Dragon exits the approach ellipsoid, we will be out of joint operations, and the SpaceX Mission Control Team in Hawthorne will continue to monitor the rest of Dragon's autonomous flight through splashdown. Splashdown is scheduled for December 17th at approximately 12:39 a.m. Central, 1:39 a.m. Eastern off the coast of Florida. Meanwhile, Mission Control will continue to monitor the International Space Station operations. And if you are just joining us, we are looking at live views of Mission Control Houston in the International Space Station's flight control room. The Dragon spacecraft is about 480 meters away from the International Space Station. In this short amount of time, the Dragon spacecraft has already moved through 3 burns. It completed the series of 2 undock burns, resulting in a physical separation of the spacecraft at 10:05 a.m. Central, 11:05 a.m. Eastern, and has already completed the first 2 of its departure burns. This is the 31st time that a cargo Dragon has undocked from the International Space Station. The SpaceX Dragon spacecraft supplies cargo to the space station under NASA's Commercial Resupply Services 2 contract. The flight control teams continue to monitor the departure of Dragon as it gets closer to exiting the approach ellipsoid. You are looking at live views of the Dragon spacecraft from the International Space Station as it continues to exit the neighborhood of the International Space Station. That little white dot in the center of your screen is the Dragon spacecraft as it continues. We're about 4 minutes away from Dragon exiting the approach ellipsoid. That is the second safety boundary surrounding the International Space Station. The spacecraft successfully undocked this morning at 10:05 a.m. Central, 11:05 a.m. Eastern, as the space station was flying off the North Pacific coast of North America. Almost immediately, the first set of 2 hooks opened, and the second set of 2 hooks were opened after that. Dragon completed its 2 undocking burns. They were short ones, just about 1.5 seconds and 5 seconds.
If you're ready, I'm ready to begin at step 2.3.
We're with you, Don.
Almost immediately,
Okay, I'm moving to
those burns both
2.4,
performed nominally, and Cargo
activating
Dragon
the
also
APA.
went on to complete a 16-second departure burn
Copy all, we're
and a
following.
second departure burn that lasted about 22 seconds. That second departure burn helped bring the spacecraft through the station's keep-out sphere, the first safety boundary around the International Space Station. So as I mentioned, the next milestones that we are looking at, which is coming up in just a few minutes here, is the approach ellipsoid exit. The approach ellipsoid is the farther of the two safety boundaries surrounding the International Space Station. The spacecraft is expected to fly outside this marker in just about 2 minutes from now. So the Dragon cargo spacecraft is about 800 meters and counting away from the space station. We undocked about 17 and a half minutes ago. And like I said, we're just coming up in a few minutes in our boundary exit. And if you're just joining us live, you're watching live coverage of the 31st SpaceX Cargo Dragon spacecraft departing the International Space Station. It delivered cargo to the folks living and working aboard the International Space Station, and it stayed docked for just over a month, and it undocked from the port just under 20 minutes ago at 10:05 a.m. Central, 11:05 a.m. Eastern. So that little white dot in the center of your screen that you see right now is of the Cargo Dragon spacecraft as it continues to exit the second boundary or safety boundary surrounding the International Space Station. It is a oval or egg-shaped boundary, and that boundary is called the approach ellipsoid. You're getting closer views of the Dragon cargo spacecraft. It's a little bit bright with the sun shining on it, so you're getting some glare, but it continues to depart the International Space Station.
You've got the video of the displays as well, so you can see that all the displays and everything per procedure are as expected.
Copy all, Don. We're checking it out.
And we just confirmed
And Don, we're going to
that
use the full
Dragon is now over 1,000 meters away from the International Space Station. The spacecraft has exited the approach ellipsoid.
4 minutes and 10 seconds.
We've been looking at the weather with a go after watching it all weekend, and we also received a go from Mission Control in Hawthorne and Mission Control in Houston here in the International Space Station's control room to proceed for an undocking this morning. The undock command was sent, and the umbilicals were retracted, bringing the spacecraft to the internal battery power. Then the first two sets of hooks were released. The first set open nominally, committing us to the operation of undocking.
And just looking at the procedure to press means I set this unit aside and I get another unit out, if you concur.
The second set of hooks opened up as well, allowing the spacecraft to detach from the Harmony port of the International Space Station. In rapid succession, we saw the undock burns. The first set of 2 undock burns lasting just over a second, and the second undock burn lasting about 5 seconds, with both proceeding nominally.
Station Houston on space to ground 2 for Dragon. Dragon is outside the approach ellipsoid on a 24-hour safe free drift trajectory.
Excellent news of that confirmation. Dragon is on its way home, returning some precious cargo and science to researchers on the ground. Of course, the main objective of the International Space Station being science.
Lots of good science on its way.
We're getting our final views here on the screen. It is that white dot in this, almost in the top part of your screen, rather. And it is now approaching just over 1,300 meters away from the International Space Station. The SpaceX Dragon cargo spacecraft has moved outside the Keep-Out sphere and outside the approach ellipsoid, the 2 major milestones that take the spacecraft outside of the neighborhood of the International Space Station. Joint coverage between the International Space Station's Flight Control Room and Mission Control Hawthorne has concluded now. The SpaceX team has their eyes on the spacecraft and is going to continue watching it through its other milestones. NASA will not broadcast the splashdown, but updates will be posted on the agency's Space Station blog. You can find that at blogs.nasa.gov/spacestation. Cargo Dragon has a couple more burns coming up to leading to an eventual splashdown on December 17th at approximately 12:39 a.m. Central, 1:39 a.m. Eastern off the coast of Florida. Again, thank you for joining us this morning as we followed the undocking of the Dragon cargo spacecraft for SpaceX's 31st commercial resupply mission for NASA to the International Space Station. This is Mission Control Houston.